We're now in week 2 of advanced valuation, and here we're going to be basically putting in more of the foundation material. I'm asking you to do some reading if you have the textbook available. Really, chapters 7 and 15 are especially important to read. It's rather difficult to replace them because basically they consist of a very simple, concise, and fairly comprehensive treatment of the issues laid out almost like a glossary in those 2 chapters. The issues that you need to be aware of when you're involved in commercial property valuation, both for valuation and rental. So they're important. Now, the textbook, it's a matter of whether you have it available or not. The reason that it's not prescribed and mandatory is that it's possible to get along without it, but it's important for you to give some honest thought as to, first of all, if you are able to learn the ropes from maybe your work situation, if you're involved in a valuation company that does a modest amount of commercial valuation work, in which case you'll probably pick up a lot of the terminology just from being around at the office. Or if you see yourself as not having any great interest in advanced valuation, and certainly the urban commercial valuation that we're doing here, maybe you might want to just put those on the back burner. A lot of the terminology is fairly self-evident, I think. However, some of the precise meanings are worth checking up from time to time. However, the reading part of this module is a bit like reading the phone book. So while it's useful to do, especially if you see yourself as moving into this area, it doesn't have a lot of explanation and complex causality and really interesting plot to it. It's really just a series of issues, definitions, and explanations or what have you. And so I'll leave it to you as to how far you go with that. But be honest with yourself. If you want to really be able to understand and work efficiently in the commercial valuation world, then being on top of these definitions, being able to speak the language basically, is extremely important. And so this might prompt you to think about obtaining the textbook if you haven't already done so, or at least to look at other sources for these definitions and explanations. Perhaps you might have a valuer mentor who will be able to fill you in on a lot of that stuff without necessarily needing the textbook, or borrow another textbook. I'll leave that up to you. The second part of this module consists of calculations. And so we're hitting the calculations fairly hard in one sense, but on another sense, which should only really be little more than a revision and a development of things that you've done in 2 subjects or 2 units previously. And that has to do with annuity calculations, the discounted cash flow calculations we've been doing. The important innovation, the important new thing to learn here is to be introduced to this more compact approach to doing your cash flow calculations. That will be unfamiliar, I expect. It uses standard mathematics, if you like, and it's the maths which is built into Excel. It's also built into any financial calculator. And in some cases, the calculations can only really be done efficiently with a financial calculator, even though probably about 90% of them are able to be done on a general purpose, let's say a scientific calculator, at a pinch. Really the only ones, I think, that you can't do on a general scientific calculator are those that involve the computation of rates or periods. However, to do those calculations using a scientific calculator is something that I'm not going to be covering, because it involves memorizing some pretty tricky looking equations which might put a lot of you off, and so I do recommend that you use your financial calculator instead. Now, I've been recommending buying a financial calculator in the previous unit in property investment and finance. If you haven't got a financial calculator yet, probably a good time to think about acquiring one. You will need it for the exam, and you will need it in property practice, even if you don't see yourself as going into commercial valuation. It's very useful to have a financial calculator and learn how to use it. Generally, I am reluctant to do tutorials or even lectures on operating financial calculators, and the reason is that there is a number of different types, and they tend to use their own operating systems, their own approach to doing the calculations. And as a result, if I was to show you how to do it on a Sharp, it wouldn't help you if you had HP, and if you had HP, it wouldn't help you if you had a Casio, and so on. And even among some of the manufacturers, there's more than one model, and they have different operating systems as well. And so as far as the financial calculators go, I personally use a Hewlett-Packard 12C, and I will give some examples with that. However, that may not appeal to many people. You may want a different make or model, and that's totally up to you. You will find a lot of support on YouTube for financial calculators. There's a little bit of discussion on the use of financial calculators, their selection and so on in the Property Gateway. So I recommend that you look at those resources, and also at the instruction manual or whatever other documentation that you get with your calculator. Those pieces of paper that we often throw away when we pull it out of the box are intended to actually help us get through this stuff. Generally, you'll find that the manufacturer's instructions assume a fluency with financial mathematics, which is really what we're doing here. And you should have it by now, because this is now effectively the third unit in the general area of financial calculations that you've done. And so if you can't read the instruction book in a financial calculator, it means that you haven't been paying quite as much attention in your previous finance units as you should. However, it's never too late to learn. The resources and the revision resources that were in Module 1 of this unit may be useful if you do find yourself in that position. I know a lot of people are a little bit scared of mathematics and kind of leave that till the very last minute, which is not the way to approach mathematics, by the way, because if you're scared of mathematics, the last thing you want to do is hide it in the corner where it'll just growl and scare you for the rest of the term until the night before the exam, when it will absolutely shock your boots off. Get into your maths early and use the financial calculator with the Excel spreadsheets, because they're about the best worked examples that you'll have, because that way you can see that it works with Excel, and you can watch it working on the videos, and you can get the self-correcting mechanisms to work, so you've got that confidence the maths is working, and then that gives you a nice worked example that you can practice with your financial calculator with. And so these couple of weeks, last week and this week, are the best times to be doing that. Okay, don't leave it very much longer. Next week we're going to be moving into some more serious calculations to do with partial interests and ground rents, and by that stage it will be really, really handy if you're very conversant with this type of calculation. If you leave it till next week, you're going to have a lot on your plate, and the whole thing will probably look a little bit confusing perhaps. And so get in early, do the work, so that you're really comfortable and able to give Module 3 a good shake.